The heat was oppressive, the kind that pressed down on skin and made every breath feel thick with effort. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stood in the shade of a rusted corrugated awning, watching the crowd gather in the parking lot of Eastside Storage Solutions, a sprawling complex of metal units that stretched across 3 acres of cracked asphalt on the industrial outskirts of Atlanta. The morning sun blazed white against the aluminum doors, creating a glare that forced most people to squint or shield their eyes. Dust rose in lazy spirals whenever someone shuffled their feet, coating shoes and clinging to clothes with stubborn persistence. K-9 Max sat at her left heel, his tan and black coat gleaming in the harsh light, ears rotating like satellite dishes picking up frequencies humans could not perceive. Sarah adjusted her sunglasses and scanned the assembly. 40, maybe 50 people had shown up for the auction, a mix of professional resellers with their dollies and trucks, curious locals hoping to strike gold, and a few obvious first-timers who fidgeted nervously and checked their phones every 30 seconds. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man named Dale Pittman, who wore a sweat-stained cowboy hat and spoke with the rapid-fire cadence of someone who had been doing this for decades, was setting up his portable PA system near the first row of units. His assistant, a younger woman with a clipboard, was marking the units scheduled for auction with orange tape. The tip had come in 3 days ago. Anonymous, routed through the FBI's online portal, then kicked down to Atlanta PD's Major Crimes Division after analysts flagged keywords that matched an ongoing investigation. Someone claimed that evidence related to human trafficking was hidden in 1 or more storage units at this facility. The informant did not specify which unit, did not provide names, did not offer any details beyond the address and a cryptic warning that the evidence had been there for years, waiting for someone to find it. The kind of tip that could be a complete waste of time or the break that cracks a case wide open. Sarah had learned long ago not to dismiss either possibility. She was here undercover, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a loose cotton shirt that concealed her badge and service weapon. Max wore no police markings, just a simple black harness that could belong to any working dog. To the casual observer, they were just another pair of auction hopefuls, maybe a woman who trained dogs for a living, maybe someone looking for cheap furniture. The reality was different. Max was one of the most decorated detection dogs in the Atlanta PD K-9 unit, trained to alert on narcotics, explosives, and human remains. Today, his nose was their primary investigative tool. Dale Pittman tapped the microphone twice, sending sharp pops echoing across the lot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Eastside Storage Solutions monthly auction. We got 18 units on the block today, all abandoned, all contents sold as is where is. You know the rules, no touching, no entering until you pay, cash or card accepted. Let us get this show started. The crowd began moving toward the first unit, a small 5x5 tucked in the corner of Building A. Sarah fell in with the group, keeping Max close, watching how people positioned themselves, who seemed overly interested, who hung back. Old habits from years of surveillance work. The first unit was unremarkable, cardboard boxes and a broken lamp visible through the raised door. Bidding started at $20 and ended at $65, claimed by a middle-aged man who immediately began calculating whether he had made a good deal. They moved through units 2, 3, 4. Furniture, old clothes, children's toys, the detritus of lives interrupted or abandoned. Max remained calm, professional, his nose working constantly, but finding nothing that triggered his training. Sarah bid on nothing, spoke to no one, kept her attention on the dog and the units ahead. The sun climbed higher, the heat intensified. Someone opened a cooler and started selling water bottles for $2 each. Unit 7 was larger, a 10x15 in Building C. When Dale's assistant rolled up the door, a wave of stale air washed over the crowd, carrying the smell of old paper and dust and something faintly chemical. Maybe cleaning products, maybe something else. The unit was packed nearly to the ceiling with furniture, dressers and chairs, and a headboard leaning against the back wall. Cardboard boxes were stacked in uneven towers, some labelled in faded marker, most unmarked, and there, near the centre of the visible contents, sat a large white box decorated with pale pink ribbons and the words "Wedding Box" written in elegant script across one side. Dale chuckled into his microphone. "Well now, looks like somebody got cold feet. Maybe there is a dress in there worth something? Ladies, we will start the bidding at $50. Laughter rippled through the crowd. People craned their necks to see better. A woman in a floral dress elbowed her companion and whispered something that made them both giggle. Sarah was not laughing. She was watching Max. The dog had gone completely still. Not the relaxed stillness of waiting, but the rigid, locked stillness of a detection alert. His head was extended forward, nose pointed directly at the wedding box, ears pinned back flat against his skull. His breathing had become shallow and rapid. His tail, normally carried in a relaxed curve, was tucked tight against his body. Every muscle in his frame was tensed, coiled, frozen in place, like a statue carved from flesh and fur. Sarah felt ice slide down her spine despite the suffocating heat. She knew that posture. She had seen it dozens of times over the years, in warehouses and crime scenes and disaster zones. Max was alerting. Passive alert, the kind he had been trained to give when he detected something that required careful handling, something that could not be disturbed, something that should not be touched until forensics arrived. Human remains. She kept her face neutral, forced her body language to remain casual, but her mind was racing through protocols and possibilities. She could not break cover, not here, not with 50 civilians milling around and whoever had abandoned this unit potentially watching. She needed to stop this auction without revealing why, needed to secure the scene without creating panic. Dale was still talking, fielding bids, the numbers climbing as people speculated about vintage wedding dresses and antique lace. $60, $75, $80. Sarah pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to her sergeant, then stepped forward and raised her hand. $200. The crowd murmured. Dale grinned, sensing a bidding war. 200 to the lady with the beautiful dog. Do I hear 225? Silence. The professional resellers exchanged glances and shook their heads. 200 was too rich for a gamble on old furniture and a mystery box. Dale counted down, slammed his hand against his thigh, and declared the unit sold. Sarah walked forward to pay, her heart hammering against her ribs, Max still frozen at her side. As she handed over the cash, her phone buzzed. Her sergeant confirming backup was en route. ETA 15 minutes. Forensics 20 behind them. She had to secure this unit and keep everyone out until they arrived. Dale handed her the receipt and a padlock key. All yours, sweetheart. Good luck with that wedding dress. Sarah forced a smile. Thanks. I collect vintage fashion. She waited until Dale and his assistant moved toward the next unit, drawing the crowd with them, before she positioned herself in front of Unit 7 and pulled the door down to waist height. Not closed, not locked, just low enough to obscure the contents while she stood guard. Max finally moved, pressing close against her leg, his alert posture slowly relaxing, but his attention never wavering from the white box inside. 15 minutes felt like hours. The auction continued in the distance, Dale's amplified voice echoing off metal walls, numbers rising and falling as lives were bought and sold in fragments. Sarah stood in the heat and dust and waited, her hand resting on Max's head, her eyes scanning constantly for anyone paying too much attention to her unit. The backup arrived unmarked, 2 detectives in a sedan and a forensics van that pulled around to the back of the building and parked out of sight. Sarah flashed her badge at the facility manager, a nervous man named Gerald, who had been watching the auction from his office window. He started asking questions, wanting to know what was happening, what had they found? Was he in trouble? Sarah handed him off to one of the detectives and turned her attention to the unit. The forensics team, led by a senior tech named Patricia Okonkwo, approached with careful deliberation. Sarah briefed her on Max's alert, described the target, stepped back to give them room to work. Patricia nodded, her dark eyes sharp behind protective glasses. She had worked with K-9 units before, trusted their noses more than most human instincts. Her team began photographing the unit from every angle, documenting the contents before anything was touched or moved. The wedding box was extracted 45 minutes later, lifted with gloved hands and placed on a sterile tarp spread across the asphalt. Sarah stood at the edge of the perimeter tape, Max sitting at her feet, both of them watching as Patricia carefully untied the pink ribbons and lifted the lid. For a moment, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. Inside the box, nestled in layers of yellowed tissue paper, were bones, small bones, delicate bones, arranged with disturbing care. A skull stared up at the Georgia sky with empty sockets, teeth still intact, scales suggesting the remains of someone young. Not a child, Sarah noted with grim relief, but not fully grown either. A teenager, maybe, a young woman at the threshold of adulthood. Patricia exhaled slowly and reached for her radio. "We need the medical examiner, full recovery protocol." She looked at Sarah, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the horror beneath. "Your dog found her. Whoever she was, she has been waiting a long time." Sarah knelt and wrapped her arms around Max, pressing her face into his fur. He leaned into her, solid and warm and alive, a counterweight to the death they had uncovered. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good boy. You found her." The next 6 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. The storage facility was shut down, the auction cancelled, the remaining bidders escorted out with apologies and refunds. Crime scene tape went up around Building C. News vans started gathering at the perimeter within 2 hours. Cameras pointed at anyone who moved, reporters shouting questions that nobody answered. Sarah stayed on scene, coordinating with forensics, briefing the captain who arrived looking grim, fielding calls from the FBI agents who had originally received the anonymous tip. The medical examiner, Dr. Raymond Cho, arrived mid-afternoon and spent 3 hours examining the remains before offering a preliminary assessment. Female, late teens to early 20s, deceased for a minimum of 8 to 10 years based on skeletal degradation and the condition of the tissue paper used as wrapping. No obvious signs of trauma to the bones, though that would require further analysis. Dental records would be needed for identification, assuming records existed. Sarah stood outside the forensics tent, drinking water that tasted like plastic and exhaustion, when Gerald, the facility manager, approached with a folder clutched in his trembling hands. "I pulled the records," he said. "Unit 7. It was rented 14 years ago by a woman named Helen Marsh, paid 5 years in advance, then set up automatic payments from a bank account that stopped existing 8 years ago. We tried to contact her when the payments stopped, sent letters, made calls, but nothing. After 3 years of no payment, it went into default. We marked it for auction 6 months ago." Sarah took the folder. Helen Marsh. The name meant nothing to her, triggered no recognition. "Do you have an address, phone number?" "It is all there," Gerald said. "But the address is fake, I think. We sent certified letters, and they all came back undeliverable." Sarah opened the folder and scanned the rental agreement. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant. The address listed was on a street that did exist, but at a number that corresponded to a vacant lot. The phone number had a 404 area code, but was disconnected. The emergency contact line was blank. What about payment records, bank account information? Gerald shook his head. "The account was closed. I called the bank. They said they cannot give out information without a warrant." Sarah nodded. "They would get the warrant. They would trace that account, find out who Helen Marsh really was, follow the money wherever it led. But that would take time. Days, maybe weeks. And somewhere out there, The person who had placed a young woman's bones in a wedding box and left them to be forgotten was walking free. She thanked Gerald and sent him back to his office, then turned to find Max watching her with calm, intelligent eyes. He had been at her side all day, patient and steady, never complaining about the heat or the hours or the tension that hung in the air like smoke. She scratched behind his ears and felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. "Come on, partner, let us go find out who she was." The identification came faster than Sarah expected. Dr. Cho called the next morning with news that the dental records matched a missing person case from 2011. Her name was Brianna Cole, reported missing by her mother 16 days after her 19th birthday. Last seen leaving her job at a downtown Atlanta restaurant, never arrived at the bus stop 3 blocks away. The case had gone cold within 6 months, buried under newer disappearances and fresher tragedies. Sarah pulled the original case file and spread it across her desk. Max curled at her feet. Brianna Cole stared up at her from a photograph printed on faded paper, smiling, young, full of the kind of hope that comes from not yet knowing how cruel the world can be. Brown hair, brown eyes, a scatter of freckles across her nose. She had been studying nursing at Georgia State, working nights to pay tuition, dreaming of a career helping people. The lead detective on the original case had retired 3 years ago and moved to Florida. Sarah called him anyway, caught him on his boat somewhere off the coast of Key West, explained what they had found. He remembered Brianna, remembered the frustration of hitting wall after wall, remembered the mother who called every week for 2 years before finally accepting that her daughter was not coming home. There was a suspect, the retired detective said, his voice crackling through a poor connection. A man named Vincent Harlow. He owned the restaurant where Brianna worked. Rich guy, old money, connected to half the judges in the city. We liked him for it, but we could never make anything stick. No evidence, no witnesses, airtight alibis. His lawyers made our lives hell. Eventually, the brass told us to move on. Sarah wrote down the name, Vincent Harlow. What happened to him? Last I heard, he was still in Atlanta, still rich, still untouchable. She hung up and started digging. Vincent Harlow was 63 years old, heir to a textile fortune that had been in his family for 4 generations. He owned properties across the Southeast, sat on boards of charitable foundations, donated generously to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle. His restaurant had closed in 2015, but he had since opened a chain of upscale steakhouses that bore his name. He had been married twice, divorced twice, no children. His current residence was a mansion in Buckhead, worth more than Sarah would earn in 5 lifetimes. She cross-referenced his name with other missing person cases in the Atlanta area. The results made her blood run cold. Between 2005 and 2018, 9 young women had disappeared from the greater Atlanta metropolitan area under similar circumstances. All were between 18 and 22 years old. All had some connection to businesses owned or invested in by Vincent Harlow, restaurants, hotels, event venues. All had vanished without a trace, their cases eventually going cold, their families left with nothing but questions and grief. 9 women, 9 potential victims, and now 1 body in a wedding box, waiting 14 years to tell her story. Sarah brought her findings to Captain Marcus Webb, a stocky man with silver temples and the permanent exhaustion of someone who had spent 30 years fighting battles that never ended. He listened without interrupting, studied the files she had assembled, then leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. "Vincent Harlow," he said. "Do you know who that man is?" "I know who he pretends to be," Sarah replied. "I also know that 9 women connected to him have disappeared, and one of them just turned up dead in a storage unit." Webb shook his head. "His lawyers will have us for lunch. They will claim harassment, political persecution, whatever sticks. We need more than circumstantial connections. We need evidence that puts him at the scene, DNA, witnesses, something concrete. Then let me investigate. Let me find the evidence." Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Do it quietly. Do not spook him. And for God's sake, do not let the media get wind of this until we have something solid." Sarah spent the next week building her case. She tracked down Helen Marsh, the woman who had rented the storage unit, and discovered that she had never existed. The name was a fabrication, the identity created using a stolen social security number from a woman who had died in a nursing home 2 years before the rental agreement was signed. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create a ghost, a person who could rent a unit, set up automatic payments, and then vanish without leaving a trace. The bank account used for payments was more illuminating. It had been opened at a small credit union in Midtown, funded with cash deposits, linked to a P.O. box that had been closed shortly after the account went dormant. But credit unions kept records, and those records showed that the signature card for the account bore a name that Sarah recognized from her research. Marcus Webb read the name aloud from the document she placed on his desk. Eleanor Vance. "Who is she?" "Vincent Harlow's former personal assistant," Sarah said. "She worked for him from 2003 to 2016. She disappeared 2 years after leaving his employment." Webb's eyebrows rose. "Disappeared how?" "Moved to California, allegedly. No forwarding address, no contact with family or friends, no activity on any of her financial accounts since 2018. Her sister filed a missing person report, but California police could not find any evidence of foul play. The case is still technically open." Webb set down the document and rubbed his temples. "You're telling me that Harlow's assistant rented a storage unit using a fake identity, hid human remains there, and then vanished. That is what the evidence suggests. And you think Harlow is behind all of it?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I think Eleanor Vance knew something she was not supposed to know. I think she hid that evidence as insurance or leverage. And I think when the payment stopped, someone decided she had become a liability." Webb was silent for a long time. Finally, he picked up his phone. "I am calling the FBI. This is bigger than us. Serial murders, possible human trafficking, a suspect with the resources to obstruct justice at every turn. We need federal assistance. The FBI arrived in force." Special Agent Diana Reyes led the task force, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had spent a decade hunting predators and had the scars, both visible and invisible, to prove it. She reviewed Sarah's evidence, interviewed the witnesses, coordinated with agencies across 3 states. Within days, the investigation had expanded to include suspected trafficking networks that operated under the cover of Harlow's business empire. Sarah worked alongside the federal team, Max at her side. They searched properties, executed warrants, interviewed former employees who spoke in whispers and glanced over their shoulders. A picture began to emerge, fragmentary and horrifying. Vincent Harlow was not just a murderer, he was the architect of a system, a network of exploitation that had operated for decades under the noses of law enforcement, protected by money and power and the complicit silence of those who benefited from looking the other way. The break came from an unexpected source. A former housekeeper at Harlow's Buckhead mansion, a woman named Rosa Mendez, who had emigrated from Guatemala 20 years ago and had spent 15 of those years cleaning up after a monster. She contacted the FBI through a tip line, terrified but determined, and told them about a room in the basement that Harlow kept locked at all times. She had never seen inside, but she had heard things. Sounds that haunted her dreams. Screams that she had convinced herself were not real because acknowledging them would have destroyed her. The warrant was obtained in record time. Sarah was part of the entry team, Max at her side, as they breached the mansion's front door at dawn. Harlow was home, caught in his silk pajamas, sputtering with outrage as agents swarmed through his palatial residence. He demanded lawyers, threatened lawsuits, invoked names that should have made everyone pause. Nobody paused. The basement room was behind a false wall in the wine cellar. Max found it, his nose leading him to a seam in the paneling that human eyes had missed. Sarah watched as tactical officers pried open the concealed door, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. What they found below would haunt her for the rest of her life. The room was clinical, white walls and fluorescent lights, and stainless steel surfaces that gleamed with recent cleaning. But no amount of bleach could eliminate all traces, and Max's nose was more sensitive than any chemical test. He alerted immediately, moving through the space with grim purpose, indicating spot after spot where violence had occurred. The forensics team would later confirm what the dog already knew. Blood traces from at least 7 different individuals, DNA that matched 3 of the missing women, evidence of restraints, of tools designed for pain, of years and years of methodical cruelty. Vincent Harlow was arrested in his own foyer, still protesting his innocence, still believing that his money and connections would protect him. They would not this time. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, documented and photographed and catalogued by teams of professionals who understood that this case would face the most expensive legal defense in Georgia history. Every procedure was followed to the letter. Every chain of custody was unbroken. Every right was read. Every warrant was proper. Every piece of evidence was obtained through means that would survive any appellate challenge. The trial lasted 4 months. Sarah testified for 6 hours across 2 days, describing the storage auction, Max's alert, the investigation that followed. Max sat in the gallery, a silent presence that the jury could not ignore. The wedding box was entered into evidence, Brianna Cole's remains identified and acknowledged, her mother in the front row weeping as justice finally arrived. Vincent Harlow was convicted on 12 counts of first-degree murder, 17 counts of kidnapping, and numerous charges related to human trafficking and conspiracy. He was sentenced to death, a verdict that would wind through appeals for years, but that represented, at last, an end to his reign of terror. But the case did not end with his conviction. The investigation had uncovered a network that extended far beyond one wealthy predator. Associates, enablers, those who had turned blind eyes in exchange for money or favors. Some fled the country. Others cooperated in exchange for reduced sentences. A few tried to fight and learned that the federal government had resources that dwarfed even the most expensive legal teams. Eleanor Vance was never found. Her fate remained a mystery, her role in hiding the evidence that eventually brought down her former employer, a question that might never be answered. Had she been a willing participant who developed a conscience, a victim who gathered evidence, hoping to escape, someone who planned to use the bones as leverage and paid for that plan with her life? The theories multiplied, but the truth stayed buried with her, wherever she lay. Sarah received a commendation for her work on the case, a piece of paper and a handshake from the chief that meant less to her than the quiet moments she spent visiting Brianna Cole's grave. The young woman finally had a resting place, a stone with her name and dates, flowers left by a mother who had waited 14 years to say goodbye. Sarah brought Max each time, let him sniff the grass, stood in silence as the wind moved through the trees. "You brought her home," she told him. "You gave her family peace." Max leaned against her leg, warm and solid, and said nothing. He did not need to. Some partnerships transcended words. The months after the trial were quieter, but no less demanding. The K-9 unit rotated through its regular duties, drug busts and tracking operations, public demonstrations and community outreach. Max performed with his usual excellence, earning treats and praise and the admiration of everyone who watched him work. But Sarah noticed something different in him, a new depth to his alertness, a sharpened edge to his instincts. The Harlow case had changed them both. In April, a call came in that pulled them back into the orbit of the investigation they thought was complete. A hiker in the Chattahoochee National Forest had discovered what appeared to be human remains in a ravine off the main trail. Local rangers had secured the scene and called Atlanta PD when they found a piece of jewelry near the bones, a distinctive silver bracelet engraved with initials that matched one of the still missing women from the Harlow case files. Sarah drove out with Max in the back seat, watching the city give way to suburbs and then to forest, the world growing greener and quieter with each passing mile. The trailhead was crowded with official vehicles, park rangers and forensics techs and FBI agents who had never quite closed their files on the victims who remained unaccounted for. Agent Reyes was already on scene, her dark hair pulled back, her expression grim. 2 more bodies, she told Sarah, as they walked toward the perimeter tape. Both female, both young, both in advanced decomposition. We think they have been here for years. Sarah looked at the forest, stretching in all directions. Endless trees and hidden ravines, countless places where a killer could dispose of evidence. How many more do you think are out there? Reyes shook her head. I do not know. Harlow owned property all over the southeast. Hunting lodges, fishing cabins, tracts of undeveloped land. We have been searching for months, but the area is too vast for comprehensive coverage. Sarah glanced at Max, who was straining at his leash, nose twitching, already picking up scents that human senses could not detect. Then let us narrow it down. They spent 3 weeks in the forest, Sarah and Max and a rotating team of handlers and dogs brought in from across the state. It was grueling work, hiking through rough terrain, in unpredictable weather, covering miles of ground each day, following Max's alerts through underbrush and over rock formations and across streams swollen with spring rain. They found 4 more burial sites, 4 more victims, 4 more families who could finally know what had happened to their daughters, sisters, friends. By the time they returned to Atlanta, Sarah was exhausted in a way that sleep could not cure. She took a week off, spent it at home with Max, long walks in the morning and quiet evenings on the couch, trying to process everything they had seen and done. The numbers were staggering. 12 confirmed victims of Vincent Harlow's predation, with evidence suggesting there might be more who would never be found. Decades of evil, hidden in plain sight, protected by wealth and power, and the unwillingness of decent people to believe that monsters walked among them. The FBI held a press conference to announce the conclusion of the active investigation. Agent Reyes spoke about the cooperation between federal and local law enforcement, the dedication of the teams who had worked tirelessly to bring justice to the victims. She mentioned Sarah by name, mentioned Max, acknowledged that none of it would have been possible without a dog's nose at a storage auction on a hot Georgia morning. Sarah watched the press conference from her living room, Max's head in her lap, and felt something that might have been closure, not happiness, never that, but a sense that they had done what they could, that the work had mattered, that the dead could rest a little easier, knowing their killer would face judgment. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming spam, but something made her look. The message was simple, just 2 words and a set of coordinates. Thank you. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she pulled up a map and entered the coordinates. They pointed to a spot in rural Tennessee, a county she had never heard of, a location that meant nothing to her. She thought about Eleanor Vance, the assistant who had disappeared, who had rented a storage unit under a false name, who had hidden evidence that eventually brought down a monster. She thought about the anonymous tip that had started the investigation, the voice that had reached out through official channels to point them toward that dusty galpo on the outskirts of Atlanta. She thought about all the ways that justice could arrive, the official channels and the unofficial ones, the people who worked within systems and the people who worked around them. She forwarded the coordinates to Agent Reyes without comment. The next day, The FBI found another burial site in Tennessee, 3 more victims, 3 more names added to the list. Sarah never received another message from the unknown number. She never learned who had sent it. But she kept the text saved on her phone, a reminder that some debts were paid in ways that could never be acknowledged, that some allies worked in shadows where badges and warrants could not follow. Life returned to something like normalcy, or at least the version of normalcy that existed for a K-9 handler in a major metropolitan police department. There were still cases, still calls, still moments of tension and danger and triumph. Max continued to excel, his reputation growing, his skills sharpening with each passing month. Sarah trained new handlers, shared what she knew, tried to pass on the instincts and techniques that could not be learned from any manual. In September, she was asked to speak at a conference for law enforcement K-9 units from across the country. She stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom in Chicago, Max at her feet, and told the story of the storage auction, the wedding box, the investigation that followed. She talked about trust between handler and dog, about the silent communication that developed over years of partnership, about the moments when everything depended on believing what your animal was telling you, even when it defied expectations. Max alerted in that storage unit, she said, and I knew before anyone opened the box, before forensics arrived, before we had any evidence at all. I knew because I trusted him, because we had built something together that was bigger than either of us alone. That is what this work is about. Not the badges or the citations or the press conferences. It is about the partnership. It is about knowing that when everything goes wrong, you have someone at your side who will never let you down. She looked down at Max, who gazed back up at her with calm, intelligent eyes. He thumped his tail once against the floor, a small gesture that said everything words could not. The audience applauded. Sarah stepped away from the podium and knelt to wrap her arms around her partner. They had more work ahead of them, more cases, more challenges, more moments when the line between success and failure would be measured in seconds and instincts, but they would face it together, as they always had. A handler and her dog. A partnership forged in training and tested by fire. A bond that had brought justice to the dead and closure to the living. And somewhere in a quiet corner of memory, the ghost of a young woman named Brianna Cole smiled and finally rested. The autumn brought cooler temperatures and a shift in the rhythm of the city. Atlanta settled into the comfortable pace of football season and falling leaves, the frantic energy of summer giving way to something slower and more reflective. Sarah found herself enjoying the change. The crisp morning air that made Max more energetic on their runs, the golden light that filtered through the trees in Piedmont Park. But peace, she had learned, was always temporary in her line of work. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just after 9. A warehouse in the industrial district, one of the old brick buildings that had survived decades of urban renewal, and now housed a mix of small businesses and artist studios. A routine wellness check had escalated when patrol officers noticed blood seeping under a door and smelled something that suggested they should not try to open it without backup. Sarah arrived to find the building cordoned off, patrol cars and unmarked vehicles filling the parking lot, officers in tactical gear staging near the entrance. The watch commander briefed her quickly. Unknown number of suspects inside, at least one victim, possible hostage situation. They needed Max to clear the building before tactical could move in. She suited up in her vest, checked Max's harness, reviewed the building layout with the tactical team leader. The warehouse was 3 stories, brick and timber construction, multiple entry points, and a maze of interior spaces that had been subdivided and reconfigured over the years. Plenty of places to hide, plenty of angles for ambush, standard nightmare scenario for building clearance. "Max," Sarah said quietly, holding his face in her hands. Meeting his eyes, Time to work. He licked her cheek once, then dropped into operational mode, all business, all focus, every sense attuned to the task ahead. They entered through a side door, moving slowly, Sarah's weapon drawn, Max's nose leading them through the darkness. The first floor was clear, old furniture, scattered equipment, dust thick on every surface. They climbed a service stairway to the second floor, paused at the landing, listened. Somewhere above them, a floorboard creaked. Max's ears swiveled toward the sound, his body tensing. They continued up, step by careful step. The second floor was a warren of small rooms, former offices or studios, most empty, a few cluttered with abandoned projects. Max cleared each one with methodical precision, signaling no alert, moving on. Sarah followed his lead, trusting his nose to detect threats her eyes might miss. The blood trail started in a corner room, a dark stain on the concrete floor that led toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. Max approached the door and sat, his passive alert indicating human presence beyond. Sarah hand-signaled the tactical team behind her, watched them stack up on either side of the doorway, nodded. The door came down, light flooded the room. A woman screamed. The scene was chaos for 3 heartbeats, then resolved into clarity. A young woman huddled in the corner, bloody but alive, her wrists bound with zip ties. A man standing over her with a knife turning toward the breach, his face contorted with rage and fear. And Max, already moving, launching through the air before Sarah could give the command, his jaws closing on the man's weapon arm with force that sent the knife clattering across the floor. The man went down hard, Max on top of him, the dog's growl filling the room like thunder. Tactical officers swarmed in, pulling the suspect away, securing his hands behind his back. Sarah called Max off, checked him for injuries, found none. The woman in the corner was crying now, relief and trauma mixing in her sobs as paramedics rushed to her side. Later, at the hospital, Sarah learned the full story. The woman was named Christine Park, a photographer who rented studio space in the warehouse. The man was her ex-boyfriend, a software developer named Tyler Grant, who had become increasingly unstable after she ended their relationship. He had broken into the building before dawn, waited for her to arrive, attacked her when she entered her studio. He had been holding her for 3 hours before the wellness check triggered the police response. Christine would recover. The physical wounds were superficial, the psychological damage deeper, but treatable with time and support. Tyler Grant was booked on kidnapping, assault, and a dozen other charges that would keep him locked away for years. Sarah sat in the hospital waiting room, Max at her feet, and felt the familiar post-adrenaline crash settling into her bones. Another case, another victim saved, another predator stopped. The work continued, endless and necessary, a battle that would never be fully won, but that had to be fought anyway. A nurse approached with a cup of coffee and a smile. "That is quite a dog you have there. He saved that woman's life." Sarah accepted the coffee and reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. "He does that a lot." The nurse hesitated, then asked the question that civilians always asked. "Does it ever get easier? Seeing what you see, dealing with the worst people can do to each other?" Sarah considered the question seriously, as she always did. "Some parts get easier," she said finally. "The procedures, the protocols, knowing what to do in a crisis. But the emotional part, caring about the victims, feeling the weight of what they went through, that does not get easier. And I hope it never does. The day it stops affecting me is the day I need to find a different job." The nurse nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer, and moved on to other patients. Sarah drank her coffee and watched Max sleep, his paws twitching as he chased dream rabbits or dream criminals, his breathing deep and peaceful. They had more work ahead. There was always more work. But tonight, they had saved a life, and that was enough. Winter arrived with unusual ferocity, a polar vortex sweeping down from Canada and bringing temperatures that Atlanta was not equipped to handle. Pipes froze, roads iced over, the homeless population suffered despite the best efforts of shelters and outreach programs. Sarah volunteered her off-duty hours at a warming center downtown, serving meals and distributing blankets. Max at her side, providing comfort to people who had lost everything but still found joy in petting a friendly dog. The frozen weather also brought a unique set of challenges for law enforcement. Response times slowed as vehicles struggled with icy roads. Outdoor searches became dangerous for both humans and dogs. The criminals, however, did not take snow days. On a night when the wind chill hit 15 below zero, a call came in about a missing child. A 6-year-old boy named Marcus Williams had wandered away from his grandmother's house while she was distracted by a medical emergency. He was wearing only pajamas and slippers. At the current temperature, he had less than an hour before hypothermia became fatal. Every available unit responded. Sarah and Max joined the search, working a grid pattern through the neighborhood, the cold biting through every layer of clothing she wore. Max seemed unbothered by the temperature, his thick coat and high metabolism keeping him warm, his nose working constantly to separate human scent from the 1,000 other odors that made up the frozen urban landscape. They found Marcus huddled in a drainage culvert 3 blocks from his grandmother's house. He had crawled into the concrete pipe, seeking shelter from the wind, his small body curled into a ball, his skin dangerously pale. Max reached him first, barking to alert Sarah, then lying down next to the boy and sharing his body heat until paramedics could arrive with warming blankets and IV fluids. Marcus survived. The doctors said it was close. Another 15 minutes, and the outcome would have been different. His grandmother wept with relief and guilt, thanking Sarah and Max with a fervor that was almost overwhelming. Sarah accepted the gratitude but deflected it toward Max, who had made the find, who had provided the warmth that kept the boy alive until help arrived. That night, after the reports were filed and the shift ended, Sarah drove to her favorite spot overlooking the city. Atlanta sparkled below, lights glittering against the snow that still clung to rooftops and sidewalks. Max sat in the passenger seat, fogging the window with his breath, watching the view with an expression that might have been contentment. "You saved a kid tonight," Sarah told him. "A little boy who's going to grow up and have a life because of what you did." Max turned to look at her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "I know it is just instinct for you. Training and instinct. You do not think about it the way humans do, analyze it, assign meaning to it. But it matters anyway. It matters to Marcus and his family. It matters to everyone you have helped over the years. And it matters to me." She reached over and rested her hand on his head, feeling the warmth of him, the solid reality of a partner who had never failed her. 7 years, she said. 7 years we have been together. I cannot imagine doing this job without you. I cannot imagine doing anything without you. Max leaned into her touch, a low rumble in his chest that was not quite a growl and not quite a purr, something uniquely his, a sound that meant comfort and connection and trust. They stayed there for a while, watching the snow begin to fall again, soft flakes drifting down to blanket the city in white. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new moments of danger and triumph. But tonight they had saved a life, and the world seemed a little brighter for it. Spring returned, thawing the frozen ground and bringing warmth back to the city. Sarah noticed that Max was slowing down, nothing dramatic, just a slight stiffness in his movements on cold mornings, a tendency to tire a bit faster on long searches. He was 7 years old now, middle-aged for a working dog, still capable and skilled, but no longer the inexhaustible puppy she had first partnered with. The department veterinarian confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Mild arthritis in his hips, common for the breed, manageable with medication and modified duty. Max could still work, but the most physically demanding operations would need to go to younger dogs. He was transitioning from frontline K-9 to senior specialist, a role that relied more on his experience and nose than his speed and endurance. Sarah accepted the news with the professionalism expected of her and the private grief that only Max would see. She knew this day would come, had known it from the beginning. Working dogs had finite careers, their bodies giving out long before their spirits did. The lucky ones transitioned to retirement, living out their remaining years as beloved pets. The unlucky ones pushed too hard and paid the price. She was determined that Max would be one of the lucky ones. They adjusted their routine, shorter training sessions, longer rest periods, more time on consulting and demonstration work. Max did not seem to mind. If anything, he appeared to enjoy the reduced intensity, greeting each day with the same enthusiasm, but pacing himself in ways he never had before. He was still a working dog, still proud, still dedicated to the job. He was just doing it differently now. In May, Sarah received an invitation that surprised her. The Cole family, Brianna's family, was holding a memorial service on the one-year anniversary of her burial. They wanted Sarah and Max to attend. She stood in a small cemetery on the outskirts of Atlanta, surrounded by relatives and friends who had waited 14 years to properly mourn a daughter, sister, friend. The headstone was simple, white marble with Brianna's name and dates and a short epitaph that her mother had chosen. Beloved daughter, taken too soon, never forgotten. Max sat at Sarah's side, dignified and still, his presence a comfort to everyone who looked at him. After the service, Brianna's mother approached them, a thin woman with grey hair and eyes that held both sorrow and peace. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her face. "Both of you. For 14 years, I did not know what happened to my daughter. I could not bury her, could not say goodbye, could not have any kind of closure. You gave that to me. You gave her back to me." Sarah did not know what to say, so she simply nodded and accepted the embrace the woman offered. Max accepted his own acknowledgement, a gentle hand on his head, a whispered thank you that was meant for him alone. Walking back to the car, Sarah felt something shift inside her. She had been doing this job for so long that she sometimes forgot why it mattered, got lost in the paperwork and politics and daily grind. Moments like this reminded her, every case was a family waiting for answers. Every victim was someone's child, parent, friend. The work mattered because people mattered, and the people who could not speak for themselves needed someone to speak on their behalf. She looked at Max, padding alongside her with his greying muzzle and wise eyes. "Partner," she said, "we still have work to do." He glanced up at her, tail wagging once, and they continued on together. The summer brought the case that would become the capstone of Max's career. A serial arsonist had been terrorizing Atlanta for 3 months, setting fires in abandoned buildings, warehouses, and condemned structures throughout the city. No deaths yet, but it was only a matter of time. The fires were becoming more frequent and more daring, moving from isolated locations to populated areas. The arsonist escalating in a pattern that behavioral analysts recognized as the prelude to something catastrophic. The investigation had stalled. Traditional methods, surveillance, informants, forensic analysis had yielded little. The arsonist was careful, leaving minimal evidence, never appearing on camera, never bragging or seeking attention. He was a ghost, a shadow that struck and vanished before anyone could react. Agent Reyes, still coordinating federal resources in Atlanta after the Harlow case, reached out to Sarah with a proposal. Arson dogs were rare and valuable, trained to detect accelerants at fire scenes. Max was not a certified arson dog, but his nose was exceptional and his handler was one of the best. Would they be willing to try? Sarah consulted with Max's veterinarian and got cautious approval. The physical demands of arson investigation were moderate. Nothing like tracking fleeing suspects or searching rough terrain. If Max could help, if his nose could find what others had missed, the risk was worth taking. They started with the most recent fire scene, a warehouse in the industrial district that had burned 3 days earlier. The official arson investigators had already processed the site, collecting samples and documenting evidence, but they had found nothing conclusive. Sarah walked Max through the ruins, letting him set the pace, watching for any sign of alert. He found it in a corner that the initial investigation had dismissed as fully consumed by the fire, a patch of concrete that looked no different from its surroundings to human eyes. But Max's nose detected something beneath the char and ash, a chemical residue that had soaked into the porous surface before the flames reached it. He sat, alerting, his attention fixed on the spot with laser intensity. Sarah marked the location and called for forensic re-examination. The lab results came back 2 days later. Accelerant traces, a specific mixture of gasoline and diesel that matched samples from 3 other fire scenes. The arsonist had a signature, and Max had found it. They repeated the process at 4 more scenes, Max identifying accelerant locations that had been overlooked or incompletely processed. A pattern emerged. The arsonist was using a particular entry point in each building, a specific location where he started the fire before it spread. Understanding his methodology gave investigators a framework for prediction, a way to anticipate where he might strike next. The trap was set at an abandoned factory in southwest Atlanta, a building that fit the arsonist's profile and had been scheduled for demolition. Surveillance teams established discreet positions around the perimeter. Sarah and Max waited in an unmarked van, ready to track if the suspect fled on foot. He came after midnight, a shadow moving through the darkness with a backpack and a purpose. He did not see the officers watching him. He did not notice the K-9 unit waiting downwind. He entered the building, and the trap closed behind him. The arrest was anticlimactic. The arsonist, a man named Douglas Vance, 52 years old, former firefighter, dismissed for psychological reasons, surrendered without resistance when confronted by tactical officers. He seemed almost relieved, as if some part of him had been waiting to be caught. His backpack contained enough accelerant to level the building and enough evidence to secure conviction on 24 charges. In the interrogation room, he confessed to everything. 37 fires over 3 months. No grand motive, no political statement, no vendetta against specific targets. He just liked to watch things burn. The beauty of it, he said, the way the flames moved, the colors, the heat. It made him feel alive. Sarah listened to the recording later and felt nothing but disgust. 37 fires, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage, countless people endangered, all because one broken man wanted to feel something. The waste of it, the senseless destruction, was almost incomprehensible. But they had stopped him. Max had stopped him, finding the evidence that connected the fires, identifying the pattern that led to the trap. A 7-year-old dog with arthritis in his hips and a nose that could still work miracles. The department held a ceremony to honor Max's career. 37 cases closed, over 100 successful detections, 6 commendations for valor, and now the capture of a serial arsonist who might have killed dozens if left unchecked. The chief presented Sarah with a medal to attach to Max's harness, a small gold disc engraved with his name and years of service. Max sat through the ceremony with patient dignity, accepting the applause and attention as his due. When it was over, Sarah knelt beside him and held the medal for him to see. "You earned this," she said, "every bit of it. I'm so proud of you." He licked her face, tail wagging, and she laughed through the tears she could not quite suppress. That night, she made a decision she had been avoiding for months. She submitted the paperwork to begin Max's transition to retirement. He would continue light duty through the end of the year, then move to her home permanently. trading the kennel for a soft bed, the patrol car for lazy afternoons in the backyard. He had given everything to the job. It was time for the job to give him peace. The transition was easier than she expected. Max adapted to civilian life with the same grace he had shown in everything else, learning to sleep late, discovering the joy of squirrels in the yard, becoming a favorite of neighborhood children who begged to pet him on their walks. He still accompanied Sarah to work sometimes, demonstrating techniques for new handlers, greeting visitors at community events, serving as an ambassador for the K-9 unit he had helped build, and sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would drive to the spot overlooking the city and watch the lights come on as the sun went down. Sarah would talk about the cases they had worked, the lives they had saved, the moments of terror and triumph that had defined their partnership. Max would listen, or seem to listen, his ears perked forward, his eyes calm and knowing. She did not know how many more years they would have together. Working dogs rarely lived as long as their civilian counterparts, their bodies worn down by years of service. But she was grateful for every day, every walk, every moment of connection with a partner who had taught her more about trust and loyalty and love than any human ever could. In the end, that was what it all came down to. Not the medals or the headlines or the statistics in some database. Just a woman and her dog, bound together by years of shared experience, facing whatever came next with the same courage and commitment they had always shown. Partners, now and always. The last light faded from the sky, and the city sparkled below. Max leaned his head against Sarah's shoulder, a warm weight that felt like home. They had done good work. They had made a difference. And that was enough. That would always be enough. The morning after Max's retirement ceremony, Sarah woke to find him already at the back door, waiting patiently to be let out. She watched him through the kitchen window as he explored the yard with renewed curiosity, sniffing every corner, investigating every shadow, reclaiming territory he had known for years but never had time to truly appreciate. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Max moved through the light like a painting come to life. She made coffee and thought about the day ahead. Her first full shift without Max at her side in 7 years. The department had assigned her a new partner, a 2-year-old German Shepherd named Atlas, who showed exceptional promise in his training evaluations. He was young and eager and talented, everything a K-9 handler could want. But he was not Max. The transition would take time. Sarah knew that. Every handler went through it eventually, the bittersweet process of bonding with a new dog while never quite forgetting the one who came before. She would give Atlas everything she had, teach him everything she knew, build a new partnership from the ground up. But part of her heart would always belong to the Malinois in her backyard, the dog who had taught her what partnership truly meant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Chen, reminding her about the morning briefing. She drained her coffee, called Max inside, made sure he had fresh water and a comfortable spot on the couch. He settled in with a contented sigh, already adapting to the rhythms of retirement with characteristic grace. "I will be back tonight," she told him. "Try not to destroy anything while I am gone." He gave her a look that said he would make no such promises, and she laughed despite herself. The precinct felt different without Max trotting at her heel. Smaller somehow, emptier, even though the same officers filled the same desks and the same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Sarah made her way to the K-9 unit's training facility, where Atlas was waiting in his kennel, all barely contained energy and eager eyes. He was beautiful. There was no denying that. A classic German Shepherd coloring, black and tan, with intelligent dark eyes and ears that seemed too big for his head, though he would grow into them. He vibrated with enthusiasm as Sarah approached, tail wagging so hard his entire body swayed. "Atlas," she said, opening the kennel door. "Time to get to know each other." They spent the morning running through basic exercises. establishing communication patterns, learning each other's cues and rhythms. Atlas was quick to learn, eager to please, remarkably focused for such a young dog. Sarah found herself smiling despite her melancholy, recognizing the same spark of potential she had seen in Max all those years ago. By afternoon, they were ready for their first patrol together. Sarah drove the familiar routes with Atlas in the back seat, watching him through the rearview mirror as he processed the passing scenery. Everything was new to him, every scent and sound and sight a discovery waiting to be made. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah felt some of the weight of transition lifting from her shoulders. They responded to a routine call, a report of suspicious activity near a construction site in Midtown. Nothing dangerous, just a security guard who wanted police presence while he investigated what turned out to be a homeless encampment in an unfinished building. Atlas performed adequately, staying close to Sarah, following commands, alerting appropriately when they encountered the camp's occupants. It was not a dramatic debut. No chases, no takedowns, no moments of crisis that would test their nascent partnership. But that was fine. Trust was built in small moments, daily interactions, the accumulation of shared experiences that eventually added up to something profound. They had time. That night, Sarah returned home to find Max waiting at the door, tail wagging, apparently no worse for his day of solitude. She knelt to greet him, accepting his enthusiastic licks, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "I met someone today," she told him. "Your replacement. Although nobody could ever really replace you." Max tilted his head as if considering this information, then padded toward the kitchen, clearly more interested in dinner than in discussions of succession planning. Sarah laughed and followed him. The weeks that followed established a new routine, mornings with Atlas, building skills and trust, learning to read each other's signals, evenings with Max, peaceful hours of companionship and rest. Sarah found herself growing to appreciate both relationships, different as they were. Atlas was the future, full of potential and energy. Max was the past, rich with memories and connection. Together, they represented everything she loved about this work. In October, a case arose that would test her new partnership in ways she had not anticipated. A series of robberies had been plaguing businesses along the Buford Highway corridor, the perpetrators striking quickly and vanishing before police could respond. The criminals were organized, professional, seemingly aware of patrol patterns and response times. Someone was feeding them information, and the department suspected an insider. Internal affairs took the lead, but they needed operational support. Sarah and Atlas were assigned to an undercover surveillance detail, watching a pawn shop that fit the pattern of previous targets. For 3 nights, they sat in an unmarked van, waiting, watching. Atlas learning the particular patience required for stakeout work. On the 4th night, the criminals struck. Sarah saw them approach, 2 figures in dark clothing, moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. She radioed for backup and prepared to intercept, Atlas already on his feet, sensing her tension. What happened next unfolded in seconds but felt like hours. The criminals entered the pawn shop. Alarms triggered. Sarah moved to block the exit while backup converged from surrounding streets. One suspect surrendered immediately. The other ran. Atlas was off like a shot, Sarah sprinting behind him, years of training and instinct guiding them through the chase. The suspect was fast, ducking through alleys and leaping fences, but Atlas was faster. He closed the distance with relentless efficiency, and when the suspect tried to scale a chain-link fence, the young shepherd launched himself forward and brought the man down. Sarah arrived moments later, weapon drawn, commanding the suspect to stay down. Atlas held his position, not biting, just pinning, exactly as he had been trained. Backup arrived. The suspect was cuffed and processed. The chase was over. Standing in the alley, catching her breath, Sarah looked at Atlas with new respect. He had performed flawlessly under pressure, making decisions in fractions of seconds, trusting his training and his handler. It was the moment every K-9 team hoped for, the crucible that transformed partnership from potential to proven. "Good boy," she told him, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Very good boy." Atlas wagged his tail and pressed against her leg, seeking the praise he had earned. Sarah scratched behind his ears and felt something click into place, a connection forming that was different from what she had shared with Max, but no less real. The case broke open quickly after the arrest. The captured suspect, facing serious charges and offered consideration for cooperation, revealed the insider who had been feeding information to the robbery ring. A civilian dispatcher with gambling debts and expensive tastes. Someone who had sold out her colleagues for money that never quite solved her problems. She was arrested the next morning, and the robbery ring was dismantled within a week. Sarah received a commendation for her role in the investigation. Atlas received a notation in his file that marked him as a K-9 of exceptional promise. They had passed their first real test, and they had passed it together. November brought cold weather, and a case that would remind Sarah why she had chosen this career in the first place. A young woman named Jennifer Okafor had gone missing from her apartment in Decatur, and all signs pointed to foul play. Her door had been forced, her phone found smashed on the living room floor, blood traces discovered in the hallway. Someone had taken her, and the clock was ticking. Sarah and Atlas joined the search team, working through Jennifer's neighborhood, following every lead, chasing every tip. The first 48 hours passed without progress. Then 72. The investigation was stalling, leads evaporating, hope fading with each passing hour. On day 4, a break. A witness came forward, a night shift worker who had seen a van parked near Jennifer's building on the night of her disappearance. He remembered part of the license plate, enough to narrow the field. DMV records produced a list of possible matches. Detectives began running them down. One name stood out, Marcus Webb, no relation to the captain, a registered sex offender who had served time for assault and had a history of stalking behavior. His van matched the witness description. His address was 40 minutes outside the city, a rural property with minimal neighbors and maximum privacy. The tactical team assembled at dawn. Sarah and Atlas were positioned at the perimeter, ready to track if the suspect fled into the surrounding woods. Everyone understood the stakes. If Jennifer was still alive, she had been in captivity for 4 days. Every minute mattered. The breach went smoothly. Webb was taken into custody without resistance. A pale, disheveled man who seemed almost relieved to be caught. But Jennifer was not in the house. Webb refused to talk, demanded a lawyer, shut down every attempt at interview. Time was running out. If Jennifer was being held somewhere else, somewhere Webb was not revealing, she could be dying right now, starving or dehydrating or suffering in ways that could not be undone. Sarah approached the tactical commander with a proposal. "Let me try something. Let me bring Atlas into the house, see if he can pick up Jennifer's scent, track where Webb might have taken her." It was a long shot. Atlas was still young, still inexperienced with advanced tracking scenarios, but they had to try. They entered the house together, Sarah giving Atlas a scent article from Jennifer's apartment, a shirt her mother had provided. The young shepherd circled the living room, nose working, processing the thousands of odors that filled the space. He moved through the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom. Nothing. Then he found the basement door. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floors and exposed pipes, the kind of space that appeared on every true crime documentary. Atlas descended the stairs with Sarah close behind, his body language shifting, ears forward, tail rigid. He was on something. The room at the bottom of the stairs was empty except for a mattress, some water bottles, and restraints that made Sarah's stomach turn. Someone had been kept here recently, but where were they now? Atlas continued his search, circling the room, following invisible trails. He stopped at a section of wall that looked no different from the rest, but he pawed at it, whining, certain that something was there. Sarah examined the wall more closely. Her flashlight caught an irregularity in the concrete, a seam that was slightly misaligned. She called for tools, and within minutes, tactical officers had found a hidden door leading to a second room. Jennifer Okafor was inside, alive, bound and gagged and terrified, but alive. The rescue was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Jennifer was rushed to the hospital, treated for dehydration and minor injuries, reunited with her family in an emotional scene that made the evening news. Webb was charged with kidnapping and assault, the evidence overwhelming, his future measured in decades behind bars. Sarah sat with Atlas in the parking lot outside the precinct, processing the day, feeling the particular exhaustion that came from cases with happy endings. Happy endings were rare in this work, precious, worth celebrating even when the celebration was quiet and private. "You found her," she told Atlas. 4 days she was in that room, and you found her. He leaned against her, accepting the praise, his young eyes already showing the depth that would define his career. He was not Max. He never would be. But he was becoming something equally valuable, a partner in his own right, with his own strengths and his own stories to tell. Sarah drove home that night with a lighter heart than she had felt in months. Max greeted her at the door as always, and she knelt to embrace him, holding both dogs in her mind, even as she held one in her arms. "Thank you," she whispered into Max's fur. "Thank you for teaching me how to do this. Thank you for showing me what partnership means. Atlas is going to be okay. We are all going to be okay." Max licked her face, his tail wagging slowly, his eyes warm with something that might have been understanding. The holidays arrived, and Sarah took time off for the first time in years. She decorated her small house, put up a tree, hung lights in the windows. Max seemed confused by the transformation, but adapted quickly, claiming a spot near the fireplace as his personal territory. Atlas visited once, chaperoned by Sergeant Chen, and the two dogs circled each other with cautious curiosity before settling into an uneasy tolerance. On Christmas morning, Sarah gave Max a new bed, orthopedic foam designed to ease his aging joints. She gave Atlas a training toy, something to keep his mind sharp during their time apart. Both dogs seemed pleased with their gifts, or at least with the treats that accompanied them. She spent the afternoon with her sister's family, playing with her niece and nephew, eating too much food, feeling the particular warmth of holiday gatherings. Max had come along, and the children adored him, gentle in their attention, somehow understanding that he was an old warrior who deserved respect. When evening fell, and Sarah drove home through streets decorated with lights and hope, she found herself thinking about the year behind her. The Harlow case and its aftermath, Max's retirement, Atlas's arrival, the cases solved, the lives saved, the moments of terror and triumph that defined her work. It had been a year of transitions, of endings and beginnings, of learning to hold multiple truths at once. She was not the same person she had been 12 months ago. She was more experienced, yes, but also more aware of her own limits, her own needs, the importance of balance and rest. The job would always demand everything she had to give, but she was learning to give it without losing herself in the process. Max was waiting at the door when she got home, and she sat with him on the couch as the last light faded from the sky. The tree lights twinkled in the corner. The fire crackled quietly. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, soft flakes drifting down to blanket the city in white. "Another year," she told Max. "Another year together." He sighed contentedly and closed his eyes, and Sarah sat with him until they both fell asleep, partners at peace, the world holding its breath around them. The new year brought new challenges, as it always did. A rash of car thefts, a shooting at a nightclub that left 3 dead and 7 wounded, a cold case reopened when new DNA evidence emerged. The work continued, endless and necessary, and Sarah threw herself into it with the same dedication she had always shown. Atlas was maturing rapidly, his skills sharpening with each passing month. He had developed his own style, different from Max's but equally effective. Where Max had been patient and methodical, Atlas was dynamic and intuitive. He made decisions quickly, trusted his instincts, adapted to changing situations with remarkable flexibility. Sarah learned to follow his lead, to trust his judgment, to let him work in ways that maximized his natural abilities. In February, they caught a murder suspect who had eluded capture for 3 weeks. In March, they found a missing teenager hiding in an abandoned warehouse, scared but unharmed. In April, they tracked a serial burglar through 5 miles of urban terrain, finally cornering him in a parking garage where he surrendered without resistance. Each case built on the last, each success reinforced their partnership. Atlas was becoming the dog Sarah had hoped he could be, and she was becoming the handler he needed her to be. They were finding their rhythm, developing their own language, creating something that belonged to them alone. But through it all, Sarah never forgot Max. She visited him every evening, spent her weekends at home, made sure he had everything he needed. His arthritis was progressing slowly, managed well by medication. But she could see the changes, the way he moved more carefully, the way he tired more quickly, the way he sometimes looked at her with eyes that seemed to know things he could not say. She took him to his favorite park on a warm Saturday in May, letting him walk at his own pace, stopping whenever he wanted to investigate an interesting smell. The trees were green and full, the sky bright blue, the air soft with spring. Other dogs played around them, young and energetic, but Max seemed content to simply be present, to experience the moment without needing to chase or compete. They found a bench overlooking the pond and sat together, watching the ducks glide across the water. Sarah had brought treats, and she fed them to Max one at a time, savoring each small interaction. "Do you remember," she said, "the first time we came here? You were so young, barely out of training. You wanted to chase every squirrel, investigate every corner. I could barely keep up with you." Max looked at her with calm eyes, and she could almost believe he did remember that somewhere in his mind those early days still lived, preserved like photographs in an album. "You taught me so much, about patience, about trust, about what it means to really listen to someone, even when they cannot speak your language. I would not be the person I am today without you." She did not cry, though she felt the pressure behind her eyes. There would be time for tears later. Now was for gratitude, for celebration, for honoring a partnership that had defined so much of her life. "Thank you," she told him, "for everything." Max leaned against her, warm and solid, and they sat together as the sun moved across the sky. Summer came, hot and humid, the city shimmering under relentless heat. Sarah worked long shifts, Atlas at her side, the two of them falling into the comfortable rhythm of established partnership. They had become a respected team, known throughout the department for their efficiency and success rate. In July, a case came that would test everything Sarah had learned, everything she had become. A domestic terrorist had planted bombs throughout the city, threatening to detonate them unless his demands were met. The demands were incoherent, the product of a disturbed mind. But the threat was real. Bomb squads worked frantically to locate and defuse the devices, while negotiators tried to establish contact with the suspect. Sarah and Atlas were assigned to search a shopping district in Buckhead, one of several high-priority areas where bombs might be hidden. They moved through crowds of evacuating civilians, checking every suspicious package, every unattended bag, every shadow that might conceal destruction. Atlas found the first bomb under a bench in the food court. He alerted immediately, his training taking over, and Sarah called in the bomb squad while clearing the remaining civilians from the area. The device was defused successfully, and they moved on to the next location. They found 3 more bombs that day. Each time, Atlas led the way, his nose cutting through the chaos to find the deadly packages hidden in plain sight. Each time, the bomb squad followed their lead and rendered the devices safe. By nightfall, the crisis was over. The suspect had been located and apprehended. The city had been saved from what could have been a catastrophic attack. Sarah received another commendation. Atlas was featured in news reports as the hero dog who had helped prevent tragedy. But what mattered most to Sarah was something simpler, more personal. She had done her job. She had protected her city. And she had done it with a partner she trusted absolutely. That night, she went home and held Max for a long time, telling him about the day, sharing her fears and her relief. He listened as he always did, patient and present, his eyes reflecting understanding that transcended language. "I was scared," she admitted, "more scared than I have been in years. But Atlas was amazing. He never hesitated, never faltered. He was exactly the dog I needed him to be." Max licked her hand and she smiled through her exhaustion. "You would be proud of him," she said. "I know you would." Fall arrived, painting the city in shades of red and gold. Sarah noticed that Max was sleeping more, eating less, moving with increasing difficulty. The veterinarian confirmed what she already knew. His body was failing, the accumulated wear of years of service finally catching up with him. They had weeks, maybe months, enough time to say goodbye properly, to make the most of whatever remained. Sarah adjusted her schedule, spending more time at home, taking Max to all his favorite places while he could still enjoy them. The park where they used to train, the coffee shop where the barista always had a treat waiting, the quiet spot overlooking the city where they had watched so many sunsets together. Each outing was bittersweet, shadowed by the knowledge of what was coming. But Sarah refused to let that shadow darken the present. Max deserved joy until the very end, and she was determined to give it to him. In November, on a cool morning with leaves falling like gold coins from the trees, Max had a seizure. Sarah rushed him to the emergency vet, holding him in her arms, begging him to hold on. He survived, but the episode left him weakened, disoriented, unable to walk without assistance. The veterinarian was gentle but honest. His quality of life was deteriorating. More seizures were likely. He was suffering, even if he tried to hide it. The kindest thing, the doctor said, would be to let him go. Sarah spent the night on the floor of Max's room, holding him, telling him stories about their years together, thanking him for everything he had given her. He listened with half-closed eyes, his breathing shallow but steady, his heart still beating against her palm. In the morning, she made the call. The end came peacefully. Max cradled in Sarah's arms, the veterinarian administering the injection with practiced compassion. Sarah felt the moment his heart stopped, felt the warmth begin to fade from his body, felt the world become a little emptier and a little colder. She stayed with him for a long time afterward, crying the tears she had held back for months, grieving the loss of a partner, a friend, a piece of her own soul. "Rest now," she whispered. "You have earned it." The funeral was small, just Sarah and a few close colleagues who had known Max well. They buried him in a pet cemetery on the outskirts of the city, under an oak tree that would shade his grave through every season. The headstone was simple, his name and dates, and a short epitaph that Sarah had chosen herself. "Faithful partner, beloved friend, forever remembered." Sarah stood at the grave as the others left, the autumn wind moving through the leaves above her. She did not know how to do this, how to move forward without him. 7 years of partnership, 7 years of shared purpose, and now it was over. But even in her grief, she knew that Max would not want her to stop. He would want her to continue the work, to protect the city they both loved, to be the handler he had trained her to be. His legacy was not just the cases they had solved together. It was everything he had taught her about courage and loyalty and love. She placed her hand on the cold stone and made a promise. "I will make you proud," she said, "every day, every case, every moment. I will carry you with me, and I will make you proud." The wind stirred the leaves, and Sarah imagined she heard his bark, distant and fading, a final farewell from a soul that would never truly be gone. She walked back to her car, where Atlas was waiting. The young shepherd pressed against her as she opened the door, sensing her grief, offering what comfort he could. She wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. "Come on, partner," she said, "we have work to do." And together they drove toward the city, toward the future, toward all the cases and challenges that still awaited them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Sarah watched the colors fade into twilight. Max was gone, but the work continued. The partnership continued. The love continued, transformed but not diminished, carrying forward into every moment that remained. That was his gift. That was his legacy. And Sarah would honor it every day for the rest of her life. The months that followed Max's death were difficult in ways Sarah had not anticipated. She threw herself into work, spending long hours training with Atlas, taking every case that came her way, filling the empty spaces with purpose and action. But the grief was patient, finding her in quiet moments, in the silence of her house, in the absence of familiar sounds and routines. Atlas became her anchor. The young shepherd seemed to sense her pain and responded with increased attention, pressing close during pauses, offering silent companionship when words would not have helped. Their partnership deepened through shared loss, each learning to trust the other more completely, each growing stronger in the process. In December, Sarah received an unexpected call. A woman named Margaret Cole, Brianna's mother, wanted to meet, not at the cemetery this time, but at her home, for coffee and conversation. Sarah drove to the small house in East Atlanta on a grey Sunday afternoon, uncertain what to expect. Margaret greeted her at the door with a warm embrace, older and thinner than Sarah remembered, but with the same quiet strength in her eyes. They sat in a living room filled with photographs of Brianna, images spanning her entire too-short life. Margaret served coffee and homemade cookies, and for a while they simply talked, sharing stories, filling the space with memories and connection. Then Margaret set down her cup and looked at Sarah directly. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what you did for my family. Not just finding Brianna, not just bringing that monster to justice. You gave us closure, you gave us peace. And I realized that I never properly thanked you for that." Sarah started to protest, to deflect the gratitude as she always did. But Margaret held up a hand. "Let me finish. I know this is your job. I know you were just doing what you were trained to do. But it was more than that. I could see it in your eyes, at the funeral, at the trial. You cared. You actually cared about my daughter, even though you never met her. That means more to me than any commendation or ceremony." Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes and did not try to stop them. She deserved better, she said. All those women deserved better. I wish we could have found them sooner. I wish we could have stopped him before he started. Margaret nodded slowly. "I know, I wish that too. But wishing does not change the past. All we can do is honor the future, make sure it does not happen again, make sure their deaths meant something." Sarah thought about Max, about his role in starting the investigation, about the partnership that had made everything possible. "He found her," she said. "My dog. He was the one who alerted at that storage unit, who told me something was wrong before anyone else knew. Without him, we might never have opened that case." Margaret smiled, the expression carrying years of grief and healing. "Then he was a blessing A four-legged angel sent to bring my daughter home. They talked for another hour, sharing the kind of intimate truths that only those who have touched the same darkness can understand. When Sarah finally left, she felt lighter, as if some burden she had not known she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. She drove home through streets decorated for the holidays, thinking about angels and blessings and the mysterious ways that justice sometimes found its path. Max had been gone for only a month, but his influence was still being felt, still rippling outward in ways she could not have predicted. That was legacy. That was meaning. That was the true measure of a life well lived. Winter deepened, and the city settled into the rhythms of the season. Sarah worked through the holidays, volunteering for shifts that others wanted off, finding solace in service. Atlas stayed at her side, learning and growing, becoming more capable with each passing week. In January, a case emerged that would test their partnership in new ways. A string of home invasions had been terrorizing an affluent neighborhood in Buckhead, the perpetrators striking with surgical precision, always when houses were empty, always taking specific items of high value. The pattern suggested professional thieves with inside information, possibly someone working in the real estate or security industries. Sarah and Atlas were assigned to the investigation, working alongside detectives who were growing frustrated with the lack of progress. The criminals left minimal evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could be traced back to identifiable suspects. Traditional methods were failing. Sarah proposed a different approach. If the thieves were targeting specific homes, they must be gathering intelligence somehow, watching potential victims, studying their routines, learning when houses would be empty. That surveillance left traces, not physical evidence, but behavioral patterns that a trained observer might recognize. She began spending her off-duty hours in the affected neighborhood, walking Atlas through the streets at different times of day, watching for anything unusual. She mapped the locations of the burglaries, identified common factors, built a profile of how the criminals operated. On the third week, she noticed a van. It was nothing remarkable. A white panel van with a landscaping company logo, the kind of vehicle that blended invisibly into affluent neighborhoods. But Sarah saw it twice in 2 days, parked in different locations, always with a clear sightline to expensive homes. She ran the plates and discovered the landscaping company did not exist. The trap was set carefully. Working with detectives, Sarah identified the most likely next target, a mansion whose owners were away on vacation. Surveillance teams established positions around the property. Sarah and Atlas waited in an unmarked vehicle 2 blocks away. The criminals came that night, 3 of them in the fake landscaping van. They disabled the alarm system with professional efficiency and entered through a side door. Sarah watched them go in, counted to 30, then moved. What followed was chaos and coordination in equal measure. Backup converged from all directions. 2 suspects fled out the back and were tackled by waiting officers. The third ran toward the front, directly into Atlas's path. The young shepherd was magnificent. He intercepted the fleeing criminal with perfect timing, bringing the man down without excessive force, holding him until Sarah arrived with handcuffs. The arrest was clean, the evidence overwhelming, the case closed. In interrogation, the suspects revealed the full scope of their operation. They had been working for months, targeting wealthy neighborhoods across the city, using sophisticated surveillance techniques to identify ideal targets. The total value of stolen property exceeded $2 million. Sarah received praise from her superiors, commendations from the department, recognition in local news coverage. But what mattered most to her was simpler. She had done the work. She had trusted her instincts, and Atlas had proven himself ready for any challenge. Spring arrived, and with it came a new assignment. The department was establishing a specialized task force focused on human trafficking, building on the expertise developed during the Harlow investigation. Sarah was asked to lead the K-9 component, training handlers and dogs for the unique challenges of trafficking cases. It was an honor and a responsibility, one that carried echoes of Max and everything he had helped accomplish. Sarah accepted immediately. The work was demanding but rewarding. She developed training protocols based on her own experiences, teaching new handlers how to read their dogs, how to trust their instincts, how to work as true partners rather than merely handler and tool. She brought in experts from federal agencies, established relationships with victim advocacy groups, created a program that was recognized as a model for departments across the country. Atlas continued to work cases, his reputation growing with each success. But Sarah increasingly found herself in an advisory role, sharing knowledge rather than leading operations, teaching the next generation of K-9 teams. It was a natural evolution, one that allowed her to multiply her impact beyond what any single handler could achieve. In the quiet moments, she still thought about Max. His photograph hung on her office wall, a reminder of where everything had begun. She talked to him sometimes, when no one else was around, sharing her challenges and victories as she had when he was alive. "I hope I'm making you proud," she would say. "I hope this is what you would have wanted." And somewhere in the spaces between heartbeats, she imagined she heard him answer. Summer brought heat and humidity, and a case that would bring Sarah's career full circle. A storage facility on the outskirts of the city had been flagged by federal investigators, suspected of containing evidence related to a new trafficking network. The similarities to the Harlow case were impossible to ignore. Sarah led the team herself, Atlas at her side. They moved through the facility with practiced precision, checking unit after unit, following the dog's alerts to locations that warranted further investigation. The search yielded extensive evidence, financial records and communication logs, and material that would take months to fully analyze. But they did not find bodies this time. They did not find victims hidden in wedding boxes, forgotten and alone. This time, they had acted early enough to prevent those tragedies. This time, the network would be dismantled before it could cause the kind of harm that had haunted Sarah for so long. Standing in the parking lot as forensics processed the scene, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The weight she had carried since that first auction, since Max's alert that started everything, seemed to lift slightly. Not gone entirely, never that, but lighter, more bearable. She had made a difference, not just in the lives she had saved, but in the system she had built. The people she had trained, the impact that would continue long after she was gone. That was legacy. That was meaning. That was enough. The years that followed were good ones. Sarah continued her work with the task force, watching it grow and evolve, seeing the handlers she had trained become leaders themselves. Atlas retired at 9, his body finally slowing enough to warrant the transition. He lived out his remaining years at Sarah's side, peaceful and content, a beloved companion until the very end. She never stopped visiting Max's grave. Every year on the anniversary of his death, she brought flowers and sat beneath the old oak tree, telling him about everything that had happened, sharing the victories and the setbacks, keeping him connected to the work he had started. The headstone was weathered now, the letters slightly faded, but the words remained clear. Faithful partner, beloved friend, forever remembered. Sarah ran her fingers over the stone and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, as she always did, "for everything." The wind stirred the leaves overhead, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Sarah stood, dusted off her clothes, and walked back toward the world. There was more work to be done. There always was, and she would do it, as she always had, carrying Max with her, honoring his memory in every choice she made. Partners, now and always. The end.